Good afternoon. It is 4 p.m. on September 22nd, and we have a special meeting of the MDUSD board. And we're going to go ahead and we will start with roll call. And I will start with Vice President Mason.
Here.
Ms. Mayo.
Here.
Ms. Durkee.
Here.
Ms. Towns.
Here.
And I'm here, so all 5 board members. And if folks will go ahead and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you. We do have, so typically at a special meeting, the only public comment would be for items which are on the agenda for that special meeting. However, our posting indicated that it would be general public comment for things not on the agenda. So we do have about 10 voicemails, and we're going to go ahead and we'll play those. So item 3.1 is public comment. So the public may address the board regarding any item within the jurisdiction of the Board of Education of the MDUSD that is not on the agenda. These presentations are limited to 3 minutes each, or a total of 30 minutes for all speakers, or the 3-minute limit may be shortened. If there are multiple speakers on any one subject, the public comment period may be moved to the end of the meeting. Speakers are not allowed to yield their time. And as we've stated before, so the board is able to receive information, but since these matters are not agendized, the board is not able to engage in a dialogue. Rather, what we can do is perhaps ask a clarifying question of staff or to ask staff to follow up. And I am hopeful that at our Monday meeting on the 28th that we'll be able to incorporate public speakers via Zoom so that the speakers will actually be able to join us in the meeting instead of just doing recorded voicemail. So that is what we are aiming for on September 28th. So with that, I will pause and give staff an opportunity to go ahead and play the 10 or so voicemails that we have received. Thank you.
Hello, I'm a parent of a 5th grader. He is not doing well with distance learning. We've had 3 days without peers. He's not engaged during Zoom and is not connecting with peers during class time. Please consider the health and well-being of our students. Groups of students need to be brought back to school for face-to-face learning. This is not okay. I am the mother of a 3rd grader at Mount Diablo Elementary and a 6th grader at Diablo View Middle School here in Clayton. Our teachers have done a great job adjusting to distance learning, but nothing can replace in-person instruction. My daughter, who is 11 and at a very crucial age, has gone from loving school, being in leadership, playing the violin and band, to dreading school and dreading being online all day. She is in tears almost every day, and both of my kids are losing their love for learning. This has been going on for 6 months now, and we need to learn to live safely with COVID-19. My children deserve the option of an in-person education, even if it's hybrid. I urge you, open schools as soon as possible. We are failing our kids by keeping them in front of a computer all day. Thank you.
My name is David Shuey. I'm a resident of Clayton, former 3-time mayor and 16-year council member. I would like to call and express my displeasure that the board has not basically met in good faith with the Clayton Valley Charter High School to resolve the issues with the facilities. It's my understanding the school has offered even more than what you asked for originally, and they've gotten no response. I urge you to please meet in good faith and resolve this dispute, get the money that the MDUSD believes is owed and that Clayton is willing to offer so that Clayton can then use money to improve our campus for our students. Thank you.
Hello, I am a parent of a student that attends Clayton Valley Charter High School. I'm calling in response to us them making improvements to our campus and we have informed that you have blocked or have rejected our offer. We ask that you reconsider, considering the pandemic. Our students do not need another situation. We would like to continue being students of Clayton Valley Charter High School, so if you please reconsider and approve our Measure C projects. Thank you.
Hello, this message is for the board meeting. I am a parent of 2 children at Mount Diablo Elementary in Clayton, a kindergartner and a first grader. My kindergartner is getting no learning, even though he has an amazing teacher. It is very hard to get a kindergartner engaged through a computer. He's extremely shy. He never wants to voice anything, never wants to talk. When I try to teach him, he doesn't want to listen to me. His sweet teacher does one-on-ones with him, which is great, but distance learning is not a replacement for education for a kindergartner. Please open up schools for our little ones.
Oh, hi, this is Brian Thomas. I live here in Concord, California, obviously inside the district. My son, Luke Thomas, is a student at Clayton Valley Charter High School. You have a board meeting coming up, and I understand there's some kind of an issue with the board's problems and communications and negotiations with the school. Why has the Board of Education rejected the offer and not responded to communications from Clayton Valley? Clayton Valley has offered the district everything they asked for and more, so why aren't you agreeing to the offer? Why is USD cutting programs when Clayton Valley is willing to pay an additional $2 million? Why does Mount Diablo Unified School District want to pay more legal fees to keep this going on instead of simply coming to terms and negotiating in good faith? And finally, I'd like you to agree to the settlement at the next regular Monday meeting on Monday, September 28th. Thank you very much.
Please get our kindergartners back to school.
Hi, my name is Tanya Ford. I am a parent of a CBCHS student who's in their sophomore year. I'm calling because it's incredibly disappointing to hear that the board is still not willing to accept the offer given by CBCHS and has ignored the request for a response and attempt to come to an agreement. Wasting money on litigation gives the appearance that the desire of the board is to continue to waste dollars instead of investing in the improvement of programs for students who attend CBCHS. It's time to come to agreement so that the faculty, families, and students can move forward, focusing on a solid educational foundation. Thank you for your time and listening.
Hello, my name is Will Cortez. My son, Jacob Cortez, attends Clayton Valley Charter School. I would like for you guys to help out as much as possible. My son went from being a below 2.0 student to being 3.5. And, you know, now he has dreams to go to college. All I can say is that Clayton Valley Charter has done wonders for my youngest son. You know, so again, I ask and I beg you guys to please help out the school any way possible. Again, my name is Will Cortez, and I have a son that attends Clayton Valley Charter School. Thank you.
Hi, as a resident of the area that Mount Diablo School District is in, I ask that Mount Diablo School District works on bettering itself versus spending time and energy and money trying to make another school unsuccessful. I expect the district to stick to its word, to negotiate timely, and be open with arguments and honestly work for a solution. I expect my district to have integrity, less ego, and to do what is best for our community as a whole. Thank you.
And that concludes voice comments. And that concludes.
And I will unmute, sorry. So we will move along to 4.0 business action items. So starting with 4.1, which is the public hearing on the learning continuity and attendance plan for 2020-21, the renamed or reacronymed LCAP. So Dr. Clark, over to you.
Yep, and I'm gonna turn this over to Ms. Jen Sachs, and she will be leading this discussion. Ms. Sachs?
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. I really want to recognize the team that's actually on the Zoom this afternoon. This document was certainly not created in isolation. We had individuals across the district helping us pull the bits and pieces together. And I also want to recognize Dr. Lisa Gonzalez as well as Dr. Wendy Gilly, who will help present this, what we're referring to as the LCP, to the community for a public hearing. Next slide. So the Learning Continuity Plan, or what we're referring to as the LCP, is a key part of the overall budget package that was approved during the summer of 2020. The budget itself was trying to seek, trying to address funding stability for schools while also providing information up and down the state of California on how our schools were responding to the COVID pandemic. I think even though President Lawrence, you mentioned the LCAP, the LCP is actually not meant to take the place of the LCAP. It is not that comprehensive of a document. It's actually pretty narrow in scope. It's really wanting us to focus on the pandemic that we've been living through since spring 2020, and also focus on the plans as we opened up school this year in a very, very different educational model. What will happen is in January, the state will actually issue a new template for the local control accountability plan as they reorient us to a new timeline. Next slide. The Learning Continuity Plan addresses the following areas. It starts off with general information, just kind of an overarching kind of picture of the district and the impact the pandemic had on the community at large. Stakeholder engagement, how did we collect information in order to develop the document? The continuity of learning, how are we ensuring that we continue with the learning regardless of the design that we ended up opening school with? The pupil, let me move my, there we go, pupil learning loss is the other section, which is really about how are we going to be addressing pupil learning loss, which unfortunately is something where it was such a significant disruption in the spring. And then through the summer, as folks were kind of reorienting themselves to this new COVID-19 environment, how we opened up in the fall, we have a responsibility to take a look at the learning loss and try to identify different types of differentiation and supports in order to address that. Mental health and social emotional well-being. Our families, our staff, our students have been traumatized in many instances with regards to what has occurred. So how are we pulling together supports in that area? Pupil and family engagement and outreach. Our families are definitely partners as we've opened up school. Especially because they're really the home teacher. They're individuals that have students 24/7 in their house, engaging with online instruction, but also they are really addressing quite a bit of education as they are the home teacher for their students. School nutrition is an area that from the very beginning, Mount Diablo worked very, very hard in order to pivot pretty quickly to ensure that we had food and nutritional meals for our community. And the last part of the plan focuses on increased and improved services with students with unique needs. And this is an area that's actually very similar to what we have in the LCAP, which is how are we really providing differentiated support for our underserved student groups. I think it's important to, getting back to the point of this not being a local control accountability plan, that this learning continuity and attendance plan only includes the learning loss mitigation funds. And these three funding sources are more specifically the Coronavirus Release Funds, otherwise known as CRF, the Governor's Emergency Engagement Funds, GEAR, and then Prop 98 general funds to be used by December 30th, 2020. Next slide. So as I mentioned, each of these sections, there's quite a bit of detail in the plan itself. The LCP, just overall actions as a response to COVID, is we utilize quite a bit of the information that was included in the roadmap to reopening. And we just, again, want to thank the task force members, as well as the community, the public, our employees, our students, our families, for providing us a lot of information from the surveys that we collected, that data, as well as the feedback and suggestions that came up from that. We know that COVID-19 has disproportionately impacted our historically underserved communities more than anybody else. We knew that our students needed access not only to instructional resources in print, but also online. And of course, that meant that laptop distribution, Chromebooks, Wi-Fi, internet access was of the highest priority for our communities. We knew after the spring, into the summer and into the fall, that training for teachers, staff, students, and families was incredibly important. Families are, as I said, individuals that are the teachers at home. And so making sure that they were aware about how to get on different platforms, utilizing different tools was essential. And then our shift in staff duties has been significant. And there's an area of the plan that speaks specifically about that. And that's really to meet the needs of the distance learning. And it's something that is temporary in basis. So as we look to hopefully, fingers crossed, reopening, that they would then go back to their more normal duties. Next slide. So within the section addressing stakeholder engagement, again, we really took a look at the student, family, and staff surveys that were collected in the spring and in the summer. We utilized the information from the task force groups, including many of our union representation that were on those committees. But as we have worked on different MOUs and contract issues, that feedback has been incredibly important to the LCP. We took a look at board meeting public comment and different reports. We have asked for feedback from all of our different advisory committees, the Community Advisory Committee, Equity Advisory, our Parent Advisory, our District English Learner Advisory Committee. So we want to thank them for all of their input. This is a public hearing occurring on September 22nd, and then this plan will be presented back to the school board for approval on September 28th. We know this is a very, very tight timeline. We have surveys that are available on our district website under the LCAP link that you can go onto to provide any type of feedback, input, thoughts about the different sections, because our deadline to the county office is September 30th. Now with this LCP, please don't think that if we receive additional input, thoughts, and ideas, or the context of which we're providing education changes, we would be bringing the LCP back if there needs to be changes made to the document in order to ensure that it actually meets our district and our community needs. Next slide. The next section within the LCP talks about continuity of learning. And really the continuity of learning are those different educational models that within our reopening plan we discussed. Right now we're in a full-time distance learning, but as we begin to open up, we move into a different color. We're having conversations with our different union partners to take a look at what metrics we would need to have in place in order to then make the determination to bring back small groups. From there, we would maybe move into a hybrid model, and then from there, full distance learning. All of this is discussed on the continuity of learning, but regardless of the educational model we are in, we need to have the priority being given to our students with the highest needs. We need to make sure the health and safety protocols are followed. And under SB 98, students must have access to high quality, rigorous first instruction. And again, that's regardless of the type of educational model that Mount Diablo is working under. Next slide. So right now, as we all know, we are in distance learning. Underneath continuity of learning, what does this mean? Well, we have worked to provide equitable access to digital and printed curriculum. We have several schools that are actually on a particular schedule with their families where the students are picking up materials. It might be extra glue sticks, it might be workbooks, it might be even library books. And so every other week or so, they're picking up that. And again, we understand that the platform where the Google Classrooms and the Seesaw classrooms are located, that is incredibly important So those devices and those hotspots are things that we're constantly monitoring. The instruction will follow and has been following standards and scope and sequence work. We have curriculum specialists and teachers on special assignment that have been working in teams with classroom teachers in order to make sure that all of that information is available in teacher Google Classrooms. So it's at teachers and administrators' fingertips. Consistent learning management systems. This was something that we heard a lot of feedback on in the spring. Everyone appreciated the teachers' quick response to creating all sorts of different, access points and platforms and tools and all of that. But it was a bit overwhelming for our students and families. So as we opened up the school year, consistent learning management systems were adopted. Consistent video conference and communication tools have been used. Our district is really accessing Zoom quite a bit, as well as Google Meets, and then utilizing one single sign-on through Clever. So there might be several different supplemental programs offered to families and to students, but having one dashboard where there's almost different, just different tiles that students can access makes it a lot easier, especially for our younger students. We are monitoring participation in progress using a variety of different codes within our ARIES system, which is our student data management system. And we have a very robust distance learning professional development plan in order, where they have synchronous professional development, asynchronous, which would be webinars that have been recorded, or different types of other methods. And then also we have tiered support. So it's differentiated by the individual needing the support from the very, very basic beginning all the way up through folks that really consider themselves experts. And this is not only for our teachers, but it's also for our classroom assistants, support staff, as well as our parents and families. And I really want to shout out to our adult education team that have put together quite a few offerings in English and Spanish for our families. Next slide. So I'm going to hand over the mic to Dr. Wendy Aguili, who will share about a couple of the additional sections in the LCP supporting our pupils with unique needs.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me today to speak about our plan. So some of the special services that we're ensuring our students have access to are the ones that they're entitled to in the regular school year also, such as our students who are identified as English language learners. They will continue to receive the same services in terms of designated integrated English language development. We want to ensure that they're continuing to make progress in their acquisition of English language skills, and we want to make sure that we also have bilingual staff and ability to reach out to our community in the communication language that they find most appropriate for them, to make sure that we're including them in the services that they need for their children. Regarding our homeless and foster youth, we also are making special attempts to reach out to those populations. One of our main goals there is that they did receive the first priority to make sure that they had not only access to the devices that they needed, but also to the connectivity, the internet, and those types of things. And for our students and families for whom that was not an option, we wanted to prioritize even paper and pencil materials for them so they could continue to learn. We also had school supplies available and other community resources, along with continuing to monitor their progress and continuing our social work outreach to ensure that any barriers that were stopping them participating in school could be addressed and potentially overcome through either district services or referral to outside agencies. Next slide, please. For our students with disabilities, they also did receive priority for devices and connectivity. And then we also made sure that we had adaptive technology available. So for such as our students who needed a larger screen or other equipment in order to access their online classes. Paper and pencil was most appropriate for some of our students who really were struggling to access synchronous learning. So we wanted to make sure that, again, as we're trying to address learning loss, that they had continued opportunities to access their program. We are continuing to monitor that progress as they go, and that's done by a variety of classroom staff and along with our related service providers who are providing those services, including speech, OT, and PT. through telehealth services, in addition to push-in services and also those simple pull-out services. We did expand our reading intervention programs for our Orton Gillingham-based reading intervention programs, and those are also available online in our K through 12 programs in both our resource program and our special day class. And we also continued our counseling services. We were able to partner with our classified staff in order to not only ensure that our students had access to support within their regular classrooms, but also that they could receive additional tutoring from our classified staff. And sometimes that looked like tutoring, and sometimes that was simply help with executive functioning skills in order to complete their work that they were unable to do independently due to their disability. We've tried to communicate regularly with families, and we do plan on prioritizing them as we return to in-person instruction. Next slide, please. Also, as we are looking at the student learning loss, we do have in there multi-tiered systems of support to make sure that all of our systems not only align in terms of need, but also across the different departments throughout the district, that we are going ahead and speaking with each other and making sure that efforts are not duplicated, but also that there are no gaps. We're continuing to monitor progress for our students, and we have implemented both our SST process and our care team processes at our school sites in order to catch those students who really are falling behind. Because while we know that all students are struggling, we also do know that some of the students continue to have disabilities, and we will continue to need to identify those students through both universal screeners and formative assessments. In order to maximize the time that we do have for instruction, we're focusing on the priority standards and a common scope and sequence to ensure that we are able to address the gaps when we come back and ensure we can get everybody where they need to be. We have those online intervention programs, as I shared, the resource support programs and intervention programs, and all of our teachers do offer virtual office hours, which are well attended, and that those hours are available for individual students, for families, and they're also sometimes used for small group interventions. We have created an extensive teacher professional learning community, and I will say that that is one of the things that we're very proud of. Our teachers went from March, some of them really struggling to go to the online systems, to now where I would say that they are experts in those areas. And while we can't always accommodate for, internet glitches or computer glitches or system glitches, I'll say the amount of learning that has gone on for our staff is truly remarkable. And I would be remiss if I did not also address our classified staff who have also engaged in extensive professional learning opportunities and have really been true assets in helping our students as they adjust to this new learning style while they adjust to it themselves. We've also offered grading rubrics for all of our teachers to ensure that students are graded fairly across the platforms and ensure they're not punished through grades for things that are out of their control. And also our attendance interventions this year have taken on a different tone. Usually it's a reactive process where we are reacting when students are not coming to school through school attendance review teams, etc. However, this year we're trying to be proactive and really try to identify those barriers to attendance and learning before the student continues to fall further behind. Next slide, please. We also are very aware of the mental health and social emotional well-being of our students. And as I mentioned before, we're ensuring that that is across the multi-tiered systems of support. We have an extensive program in our district. We have our counselors working with our students. We also have our school psychologists and our therapists. And in addition, we have several outside community health agencies who are offering support to our students. We have available social-emotional learning modules for our staff teachers that they can help deliver to the students, along with the professional network for our site leaders in order to ensure that they also are prepared to address the whole child. We have community building activities, and then we are now expanding our social emotional learning We just signed a contract that we are going to expanding that not only to some of our school sites, but also to our central office, and also, most importantly, offering those services to our families in the outcoming weeks so they also can participate. Our PBIS program is also in place across the different school sites to ensure that the foundational expectations are still in place. Many of our school site staff have been trained in trauma-informed practices and restorative justice practices. And hopefully as we refocus on equity, we can ensure again that there is a place for everybody and that everybody's learning loss is addressed to the best way possible. And again, I've also mentioned that we did start our district and site care teams, and that is to address the social emotional needs of students. Unlike the SST process that typically is more of a focus on the academic side of it, those two processes tend to go hand in hand, but those programs are up and running now. And so that as students require extra support, there is a vehicle for them to either be referred to services within the district or outside of the district. We continue our HOPE and foster youth services to ensure that they are enrolled in school in a timely manner and that they have access to the services that they need in order to make sure that they're ready for school. And in addition, one of our favorite parts is our virtual staff lounges. We know that that's a huge part of our teacher connection, is really connecting with each other, and we want to make sure that they still have that opportunity. This time is hard for everyone. And it's a surprisingly well-attended event that we're quite proud to host. Next slide, please. And as far as supporting not only our staff, but we also want to make sure that everyone feels like they're still connected to the district, even though we're far apart. So we have tried to increase our communication across an entire variety of platforms. In addition, a key part for us was the number of laptops and hotspots we purchased. And even though some of those devices are still on back order, we do believe that we have people connected. And we're hoping to get more devices in as they become available. We do have very tight monitoring of engagement and participation through synchronous and asynchronous instruction, because we know that it is difficult for every student to participate in instruction at the same time due to their own family circumstances or due to their own learning style, simply as they're learning from home. So there are multiple attendance and participation criteria being tracked. That's part of the state requirement, but it also helps us to navigate who really does need support to engage further. We do have our staff calling out to families who are not engaged or not participating, or even those students who are not participating in some of the daily activities, but are simply turning in assignments. We're trying to figure out how to get those more engaged in order to keep up those social connections and also the connections with our staff in our school. We're offering a variety of family and student trainings, and those don't only include in the technical areas of, how to get on Google or how to access Zoom. We also have a whole other category of trainings in things like, how do you set up a virtual play date for your students? How do you make sure, your student has a good workspace? How do you juggle multiple students in your family to make sure that we are addressing all of the needs that are new during this particularly strange time? And again, we've already talked about the care teams and the attendance outreach in order to make sure they're back attending with us. Next slide, please. And I'm going to turn it over to our next presenter, who is Dr. Lisa Gonzalez, who will talk about school nutrition.
Thank you. We're really excited to share that we've continued our meal service district-wide. So we currently have 12 locations. There's curbside pickup, with the exception of times when it's been really smoky and there's been air quality issues, and then it's been inside pickup. But we do have those meals available Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. We started with a window during the lunch time, and we had those windows available to coincide with the time that students would have breaks in their school days. We took a look at all the schedules district-wide, and this pretty much covered everyone. And then we got feedback from our parents that let us know that either the parents may be at home with multiple students or they were working. So we added an evening meal service. This started last week, and we'd like to give a big shout out to our CARES teams at our many sites because they've been assisting with this as well. So we do have 2 times per day when families can go and pick up meals for multiple days. Those meals include fresh vegetables, fresh fruit, milk, and a variety of healthy entrees, courtesy of our Food and Nutrition Department that recently received its award and certification for Eat Real, which means they were the first school district. We're the first school district in the state and in the nation to be able to receive that. So kudos to the team there. Likewise, when distance learning ends, we will have all of our sites that continue to be open to serve meals. So that's been real important. And one of the things that we are working on now is at those 12 meal service centers, having bus routes that are off of those, where we've identified places where students could benefit for having meals delivered out into the community and locations where we would have those available. And we're in the process of working on those logistics now. Next slide, please. The learning loss mitigation funds. You know, it's amazing what the different funds have come in and what the restrictions are and how we receive the money, what some of the stipulations are for those. But a great deal of the funds need to be used by December 30th. And then we are hopeful that there's going to be HEROES Act funding that also comes in that allows us to continue some of the great work that we will have started. So the bullets that you see on the slides and on the screen in front of you give you some ideas as to what the money can be used for. But we have approximately $19,786,707 to be used through learning loss mitigation. And there is a component of a lot of these funds, and it's called equitable service. And equitable service means that our local private schools who submitted Title I plans in the 2019-2020 school year have an opportunity to partake in some of these expenses as well. And so we have put some of those in our budget, not calling out the specific schools, but the categories of where they would be using those funds. Next slide, please. Our next steps are really as follows right now. Today we're having our public hearing. We're going to continue to open up and receive and respond to feedback and to parent questions. We will be bringing this forward for board approval on September 28th. And then moving forward, we do have the opportunity for changes as needed. And certainly with the unknown of COVID-19 and what it may look like for reopening, there may be some shifts that we have to do in our plan, but certainly we've been working very closely with our auditors. We've been working with Crow, that's our auditing firm. And we've been double and triple checking all the expenses in the proper categories and what the stipulations are and are not to make sure that we're certainly being the best stewards that we can of taxpayer dollars. And with that said, I believe our next slide is opening up for questions, and we've got a number of us who can assist.
Great, thank you for that. Do we have questions from board members or discussion?
Well, I have one correction and a couple of questions.
Or corrections.
On the, let me see what section it is. It's the access to devices and connectivity. They have the Bay Point Health District listed. There is no Bay Point Health District that I'm aware of. There's a Los Medanos Community Healthcare District, which I'm assuming is what they are referring to. They gave $15,000, which I have to say I'm a little disappointed that it sat over there with no contact from the district. And their executive director finally had to drive it over to the district himself. First, just general concerns that I just want us to keep our eye on is the issues with connecting to our foster and homeless students. I feel the CARES program, after school program, is doing good, but I think that they could do a little bit more during those after school hours with support for kids that need a little extra one-on-one time. That was one of their main components. They always used to start the day with homework help. So I think that might be something we could look at. As far as I could see, it might be happening. I didn't see that was happening. And then the last, on the fiscal part of it, I'm assuming on the form it has how much we're spending, and then there's a column that says contributing yes or nothing. I'm guessing is yes mean our general fund contribution, and if that's what it is, could the board see a breakdown of what is the money that we've got for COVID versus what we're putting in for our general fund. And then one of my favorite topics, I noticed the TOSAs. I was wondering if we could see a number of how many TOSAs we have now, how many we had last year, and the split on how many of those are being paid for by the COVID funds and how many are we paying out of our general fund. And then lastly is a question about the time, and it's not so much a presentation as things we keep hearing from parents, the time that kids are spending online. Isn't that a lot of that dictated by the state? The state has said that there will be so many hours of one-to-one instruction and break that down and what kind of instruction will be, and that we will verify what that instruction is. So that is my comments and questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ms. Mason. Other board questions and comments?
I would like to thank the counselors for creating a new website that's available with a complete collection of resources that is available. It's intended for students, parents, and staff members. And I look forward to having it more links to it in different site locations on our on the website, because I think that folks don't necessarily know where to look for it. So it's an outstanding document. It's exciting, it's vibrant, and so I hope that it will be made more visible for folks to access. And then I did some work regarding the funding pages, because normally in our LCAP presentation there's a final document that's a summary of all the expenditures, and I was looking for that. And Ms. Gonzalez mentioned 19 million, almost $20 million, and my calculations came up with $26 million. So I'm hoping that someone could explain my mistake. And of that $26 million, $10 million was for total contributing, means that the action directly or principally supports English language learners, free and reduced lunch, and special ed, homeless, or low-income students. So I would just like clarification regarding the total numbers. Perhaps there's some numbers that, some dollar amounts that are repeated between the different categories. So I was looking for the detail. I went back to our June 30th budget adoption, and then I went to our 45-day adoption and was looking for the numbers within those documents, and just was having a little bit of trouble in cross-referencing the figures. So more information like that would be helpful. It's not that I don't think these expenditures are worthwhile. I do believe we've been doing good work. I'm also interested in knowing how much is left yet that we should be spending by December. So.
Great, thank you, Ms. Mayo. Other board questions or comments?
Okay, I would just kind of add on to what Ms. Mayo is saying. I think, first of all, thank you for all the work. It's a little overwhelming to read the plan itself. There's so much going on in there, and I know that the format is restrictive in a lot of ways, so I appreciate all the detail that's in there. I think just, again, building on to better understand the funding, and to Ms. Mayo's point, what is the actual total that we're looking at here? The Prop 98 general funds to be used by December 30th is a little confusing to me. So just some clarification on, if can you really point to a specific dollar amount for that? There were there's one area in particular that, when I was reading the description, I was wondering if I guess I have to assume, although that last section of Prop 98 funds is a little confusing to me, that we're talking about the CTE. There's a whole section devoted to CTE towards the end. And so, is that meaning that these dollars that we're getting, special dollars that we're getting, being used for that? And so it just raised some questions in my mind. Is some of them sound like things we've been doing ongoing. And so, wouldn't we be just using those same funds? So I think just overall clarification on, there's this, general description of it, but I think if as much as you can point to dollar amounts and further clarify, why something would be taken out of this pot. In the example that I gave you, with why wouldn't it be, I think it was called about work-based learning coordinators, which I understood we have on staff already. And so what's different about that is, I guess, the question. So, yeah, and I guess the only other thing, it's very vague in is just, what kind of data are we going to be able to get from this process, and what's required? So there's, again, so many impressive services and activities, and at some point, will that all be able to be quantified in terms of the number of outreach there was to students or families in crisis? Those kinds of things, I think, would help kind of bring it all to life a little bit more.
Dr. Clark, before we go much further, do you want to either any thoughts, or I'm sure not having all the answers to the things that have been brought up, but anything that you'd want to share before I look to Ms. Cound for comments and make a couple comments myself?
No, I mean, the whole reason why we're presenting this today, again, is to get feedback, is to get input. And so, I know this hearing's being recorded. We'll go back and look at this, and in some instances, we'll make adjustments to the documents. In others, we just can't, because the questions are sort of outside of the scope of what it is that we're doing. But, we're putting ourselves out there by asking for this feedback. And so we're not responding to it. We're just taking notes of it. And then we'll respond as we go back and continue to work on the document and the process.
Okay. Ms. Cound?
Okay, thank you. I want to echo a few of the things that have already been said. Let's see, Trustee Mason talking about the question on the TOSAs. I had that question as well, because that was a decision I thought we had made to cut a certain number of TOSAs, and was this a decision to bring them back and use specifically the LMF funding to do so? I was not aware of that decision. And then in terms of what Trustee Mayo and Durkee were both saying in terms of the fiscal transparency here, I would want us to make sure that this document is clear, and even if the format doesn't lend itself to that we can still add our own clarity, to our own community around that. So having perhaps a chart that is that lists out all the Learning Loss Mitigation Fund dollars with the total, and so that we can see, and then out of that, as Trustee Mayo was saying, how many of those were a yes under the category of are supporting those particular students that these funds are targeted at. So I think that would be incredibly valuable information, not only for our board, but for our community, for our budget advisory committee, for example. And then in terms of the data in general, as Ms. Durkee was saying, I also had that question, and I think that's something that could be added to the report under the section where page 14, where we talk about effectiveness of strategies. In there, if we could define what data we will use moving forward at the district level. I can see some description in there about how an individual school may take this data and analyze it to change their strategies and adapt throughout the course of the year. But I think that's something we also should be doing at the district level to get a picture, so that we don't just find out at the end of the year that our dashboard, especially our red and orange categories, are still as bad as ever, right? We want to know earlier what's going on with those. So I would say there's a couple of pieces of data that we should and it could be tracking even immediately. I've been wondering what what the numbers were for spring, but we could also find out for fall. I think our technology allows us to do this to where we could see our total enrollment versus how many students have logged in at all into their classrooms, how many of those have submitted work, and how many of those are on track to pass their classes, right? And then if we could get that data overall as the district, and then also by school, and then also breaking it out in terms of some of our areas where we want to make sure that we are serving our underserved students, which could be English language learners, homeless, foster youth, African American students, Hispanic students, to make sure that if there's any sort of data showing that certain categories of students are struggling, that then we have really targeted strategies to those students. I think I was looking at some of the data from last year. Our Native American students suddenly had an increase in suspensions, but we have very few Native American students in the district. So that seems to me like that could be a very targeted solution, right? We should know who those students are and be able to figure out what's going to work for them, talk to their families, figure out what's going on there, right? So anyway, so those are some ideas of big picture data that we could look at. So that's just my reaction to what everyone else is saying here. The other pieces that I was looking at here are in the beginning of the report. So the other two categories that I'm looking at are family feedback. Are we taking that feedback? And then the data effectiveness and the fiscal transparency. So I think we've already gone over the fiscal transparency and the data effectiveness, but in terms of the family feedback, I just want to go into that in a little bit more detail. On pages 2 and 3, I thought it was really great to be able to see the feedback that has come in from our families, you know, whether it's the CAC, the DLAC, Equity Advisory Committee, the PAC. I think that's fantastic that we have feedback from all of those groups. One thing that I'm seeing across a number of them is a need for multiple languages, for not only for us to be transmitting information out in multiple languages, but also to identify families that, tools that families that do not speak English or Spanish can use to contact school to receive support. So I'm kind of seeing that as a theme of some of the feedback that we've received. And what I'm not clear on is where in the actual plan we are addressing that. What is our strategy? Are we using a particular tool? I've heard of a few of them out there. You know, I think some schools are using ClassDojo. I'm not clear whether that has two-way communication or just one way. There's some are using talking points. In some cases, we have bilingual staff. But I would love to see a breakdown of our bilingual staff, you know, of the, I think we have 50 languages, I'm not sure, spoken in our district. Of that, you know, how many students do we have that speak all the different languages, and then versus how many staff do we have that speak those various languages? They're able to do that direct outreach to the families that we so desperately need right now. So that was one. I did see some other suggestions in here as well from the PAC. There was a question about more adaptive technology for students. And I'm not clear whether that's in our plan. And then whether we would continue to host the PSAT, SAT, other college entrance assessments. I know in some other districts they are providing that, and I'm not clear where we stand on that particular item and whether it made it into our plan. Let's see. All right, and then as we move forward, you know, just being able to understand some of the specifics, I think would be great. There's a few places where there's something very general, and it's not clear what it is. So, like on page 4, high quality online instructional tools are being purchased to supplement core materials, and an exploration of interactive online materials would be great for us. Maybe a future study session or some sort of session with the community to discuss what tools were looked at and what tools were chosen, so that everyone's clear. I think sometimes there's been some confusion out there. Did we purchase this or not? Are we looking at it? that sort of thing. On page 5, there is a mention of the PPE and the HVAC filters. On that, I just had a question of what's kind of our status. If we were to open up schools, are the new filters in every location? Do we have enough of them? Have we changed them after the smoke days? Just kind of status on that. Also on page 5, it mentions that MDUSD has adopted curriculum, and I'm not clear what curriculum we've adopted recently. I'm not sure if that's distance learning tools that's referring to. I'm almost there. Let's see. Oh, and then, okay. On page 16, let's jump to page 16. I too was impressed. Thank you, Trustee Mayo and Trustee Durkee, looking at the new counseling page. Really like that. I think there's a few things that could be added there, because in this paragraph, it mentions students of color and LGBTQIA+ youth. But then when you go to the counseling page, I'm not really clear where those resources are. I think we have resources that could be added, and I understand that's a new page that's just been created, but we do have, our new board equity policy, our anti-racism resolution, and we have our policy around transgender, which I saw in the public comments here for tonight's meeting as well, and I've heard this from families as well, just the question of, with distance learning, how are we protecting our transgender youth? And how are we creating a welcoming environment for all genders? And I know that in the suicide prevention event that CDE just held last week, they talked about the idea that just providing an environment where everyone provides their preferred pronouns, like on your Zoom name, which I don't have here, but I should. So, like Cherise can, she, her, right? Just by a teacher modeling that and allowing students to put in their preferred name and gender, that actually decreases suicide rates significantly in that community. So that's the type of thing that is, I believe it's already kind of covered by our board policy. We just need to adapt it to the current distance learning situation. So I would love to see that section on page 16 include that we will ensure that students' chosen names and pronouns will be used in distance learning. And I think that's it for me. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I had 13 pages of notes, but all the other trustees already mentioned them all. So I'll say thank you to staff. I will echo my fellow board members. I think, as we get in further into the data, that is something we will certainly want to see. And I think we'll work with the superintendent as a governing board to determine some of that will be part of the superintendent's evaluation. And one of the things we look to the superintendent for is for us to jointly define what are the key metrics that we want to look at and whether those measurements. And, as a final piece, I would just say, I think we need to, have a really clear understanding that for the rest of this school year, the vast majority of MDUSD students, if not all MDUSD students, are probably going to be in distance learning. And so we need to continue to find ways, as Board Member Mason mentioned, to help support those students. If there are small groups of targeted student populations that we can welcome back safely into our schools, we certainly want to explore that. But I think that the majority of our students will be spending the rest of the school year in distance learning. And so we need to continue to, improve upon what we're only slightly more than a month into. And I think we've already learned a great deal, continued to adapt, but find more ways, such as, through CARES and other ways to support our students as they move forward. So that's my only other comment. So do we have any other questions or comments?
I just wanted to,
yes, sir.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on just, this document is not replacing our LCAP, and so it's not meant to go as deep and as wide as our LCAP goes. Again, it's just a sort of a mid-level plan of what it is that we're currently doing right now to support our students who are experiencing learning loss. So again, lots of good feedback, and like I said, we will definitely try to be more descriptive in certain areas and maybe try to tweak some areas, but again, this is something that we haven't necessarily worked on in isolation, and we're working with our partner districts, and having think groups and talking about what's appropriate to go in this plan and what doesn't necessarily belong in this plan. So I mean, I'd love to hear all the feedback, and I love to hear how engaged everyone is, but again, just kind of wanted to lay that out there, and I'm sure when the time comes, Ms. Sachs can explain a little bit more in detail if need be, of really if our plan is hitting all the points that that we're required to do for the county and state. So
just to let you know.
So anything else, Ms. Sachs?
Yes, just one last point to exactly what you shared. We did allow the county office a sneak peek at the draft, and actually we had a conversation today, and our draft is actually being shared with other districts. They felt as something that's never kind of been done before with regards to, can you tell a narrative story about what where your district has been since the closure occurred, and how you're pulling together the bits and pieces and launching forward in a situation that, again, is pretty uncharted territory. And so, but again, your feedback is really, really, helpful, and we're going to be collecting it. There's, again, 2 surveys on our district website under the LCAP, one in English and one in Spanish. The template, they're also available on the CDE website in other languages, so folks can take a look at what they look like. And I want to thank you, Trustee Cowan, for that feedback early in the game, because I think that's definitely helpful. We're really hoping to have all the input and feedback collected late Thursday, so then we can put the finishing touches on a draft for Monday's board meeting. And again, this is a document that can be brought back later in the event that our context changes, our budget changes, or anything such as that. And then in January is when we start to take a look at our new LCAP, which is, again, the more comprehensive document where we've got tons of data, a lot of information, our entire budget's included. So to Dr. Clark's point, this is a very a very small, narrow kind of focused document, but one that is really focused on those learning loss mitigation funds.
And let's be sure to thank someone.
Can I add one more thing there? Go ahead.
I was going to say, let's be sure to thank someone at the state for calling this the LCAP along with the LCAP, but it's not actually the LCAP, because that's not confusing at all. So thank you, Ms. Sachs and Dr. Clark, for helping explain the difference there. But Ms. Cowan.
One more thing that came to mind as you both were speaking is to Trustee Mayo's point, the question of what is the mechanism for us to discuss the choices as to how the learning loss mitigation funds are spent. Have they already all been allocated and spent, or how much is left that still needs to be decided and spent by December? Where are we in that process, and will we be discussing that as through this document, or are we discussing this through our discussion of our budget in a different agenda item? But I think that is something that we have not, as a board, really gotten specific details on, how the money's intended to be spent and what the strategies are, and then the measurements of effectiveness. This, as to your point, this document is one piece in terms of how we report that to the state. But in terms of the actual decisions about the funding, that's something that I'm curious about, because I do see in some cases, large amounts of funding that are going to things like professional development, teacher training, as opposed to, specific items that would go directly to students. So there's kind of the weighing factors of those, the items that are listed as no under contributing versus those that are listed as yes.
Okay, great.
Yep.
So
Thank you.
we're going to move along to item 4.2, which is near and dear to my heart, the review of the roadmap to a strategic technology plan. Dr. Clark, I'll leave it to you to introduce this item and the staff who will be presenting.
Yep. So again, I just want to, I just, first of all, I want to just, here it is a, Tuesday afternoon and we're having this meeting, but we have a great deal of work that needs to take place within our technology department and how it interacts and relates and supports our entire district. And I think that definitely having 29,000 students and over 2,000 staff, really embrace distance learning starting last March and continuing on has really sort of increased that, that urgency. And so what we want to do today is we want to share sort of the components of a technology plan and as we work towards really developing and implementing a relevant, up-to-date technology plan to meet the needs that we have now, but also the needs that we're going to have in the future. We want to start that discussion now because it's going to require lots of input, lots of these types of discussions and presentations, and and really a shift in how we do things. So I'm going to introduce Dr. Lisa Gonzalez and Robert Sitford, Director of Technology in our CBO. So they will take this item with their team.
Thank you, Dr. Clark. I appreciate that. President Lawrence, members of the board, members of the community, I'm really pleased to be speaking to you today about our roadmap for a strategic technology plan. I've been here, as I think you know, just over 6 weeks. As you can see from the backdrop, I haven't even quite had a chance to settle into my office at this point, so much to do, but I'll get there. So basically, we're really presenting today a roadmap for a sustainably supported and student-centered, learning-focused technology plan that really also addresses the infrastructure, security, and core business systems needs that we have to really empower this learning. And if we could go to the next slide, please. I want to start where we really should always start. And it's not always something that IT folks always keep, front of mind to start here, but we really need to do that. And I think making sure that we do that is critically important. So our students live in a different world than I think most of us here grew up in, myself certainly included. I look at my 13-year-old, my youngest 13-year-old, and she's tapping away on her iPhone and becoming a bit of a YouTuber. And so I think back 13 years ago to 2007, and I'd like to kind of start there just with a really, really brief history lesson, I suppose, of technology in the last, the last 13 years. So just to kind of set the tone here, 2007 was the year that Facebook was really launched. I think most of us here can sort of think a long time before that, and really, it's very instructive to think 2007 was not that long ago. If you think back to what you were doing in 2007. That's when Facebook started. And so that's one of the first really major social media platforms that really changed a lot of the way that we interact with each other online. 2010, the first iPad. This was the launch of the first iPad in 2010. That's 10 years ago. Now that's a lot for my 13-year-old, but it's not a lot for me at 47 years of age. Looking back 13 years, 10 years, not very far ago. 2015 was the point at which we reached 50% market penetration of cell phones, smartphones. So that's just 5 years ago that half of folks in our country had a smartphone with access to the internet, 5 years ago. Jumping ahead to 2033, that's 13 years from now. And the way that's relevant to me is think back 13 years to 2007, think ahead 13 years to 2033. 2033 is when our current class of kindergartners is going to graduate. So when we think of 2020, when we place 2020 in the middle there where we are right now, the question really to me is what can we do to prepare them for a world that we don't really know what it's going to look like. We don't, you know, when you think of the differences between 2007 and 2020 and the differences that we're going to see 13 years from now when our kindergartners graduate, what's that going to look like, and how can we do what we need to do to make sure that they're ready for that? So if we could go to the next slide. One of the organizations doing work in this area, and there are many, 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 I could have brought an example from a dozen organizations doing this, but when we talk about the future of work and what the world is going to look like and what we need to prepare kids for, the answer that the World Economic Forum has come up with is we don't really know exactly. We do know that there's going to be an increased premium on digital and social emotional skills. We know that there's an increased need to be able to collaborate with peers residing all over the place, all over the globe, understanding cultural nuances, and using digital tools through which these interactions can happen. So that's a really important kind of way to think about what education needs to look like into the future and how technology kind of fits in there. So if we could move to the next slide, just to take this example just a little further, and again, this is just one example, but the World Economic Forum has put together an Education 4.0 framework. And again, this is just an example. This is not necessarily something that MDUSD should adopt, you know, in this kind of framework, but it gives you an idea of where a lot of the thinking is happening in our you know, among our think tanks and folks that are really considering what education needs to look like and how technology can empower that. I won't go into this in any detail at all, but you can see that really this is grounded in the idea of the fourth industrial revolution, where technology is really embedded and inseparable from society. It's no longer just a place that we go. You know, we go to Facebook to look for other people, and then we back out again. That's not really the world we're in now. We're in this world where technology is just embedded in everything we do. So if we could go to the next slide. Turning to us in MDUSD, what skills do our students need? Because that's really where the rubber hits the road on this. What skills do our students need to thrive in this kind of world? So looking at it from one lens, and this is just one lens, the lens of employment and who would you hire as an employer graduating from MDUSD? Would you hire student A or would you hire student B? So student A has a more traditional sort of education with a lot of the content areas represented, the way we've done this for a number of years. And not to denigrate that at all, because that's been foundational to a lot of the successes that our society has had. Student B, on the other hand, has all of that content mastery, but they have some additional skills. They have modern 21st century learning skills. They have the ability to use computers in a really thorough and thoughtful way, interact with those. They have the ability to learn in a variety of modalities. That's obviously becoming more important in 2020 since March, where you know, that's really been sort of thrust upon us in a way that none of us really anticipated. And then things around computer science, but more particularly computational thinking. So ideas around how to break down tasks, how to break down thinking into component parts to really get at solutions to problems. So obviously, in the kind of context we're in today, over a Zoom meeting, I think you know, this is more of a rhetorical question than something I'll obviously ask for responses on. But you know, the question of which student would you hire, I think is a valid question for the role of technology in our world and in our educational priorities. On the next slide, thank you. What we do have in MDUSD is we don't have to start from scratch with a lot of this work, of course. As you all know, a lot of the foundations have been laid for this work. This is a board-adopted portrait of an MDUSD graduate, and I won't go into all of these in any detail because this is work that's been done in the past. But you can see there that a lot of those pieces kind of mirror the concepts that were presented by the World Economic Forum. When we're talking about effective and ethical users of technology, when we're talking about effective communicators, folks that can think in complex ways, be more self-directed in their learning when necessary. Those sorts of things are things that we already state as a district that are important to us and important to our kids. So moving along to the next slide, please. This sort of brings us to, for our purposes in MDUSD, why is technology important for this? And I think it's a question that's really important for us to ask, because there's sort of an assumption that it's there. It's the way we do a lot of things in our society. Most of our industries have been really transformed by technology integration into just the way of doing business, the way that they operate. Our society, when we think of our activities at home and in the community, a lot of these are proctored through technology. A lot of these use technology in one way or another. You can open your garage door with your cell phone today. I certainly didn't grow up with that. There's a lot of things there that are just around us. So it's important in education that we're thinking about why we use technology and why technology is important. And the real answer is right at that top bullet point. It's not about technology, it's about learning. How can we make this about learning and make sure that that's our focus? Technology fits in fits in a place where learning is what's important. Our students deserve equitable access to educational experiences. That's important to keep in mind, because technology, while we often think of it in terms of a challenge, in terms of how can we get technology to all of our students, the reality is if we do this correctly, if we do this thoughtfully, technology is actually a creator of equity, has the potential to be a creator of equity and help students to graduate and have opportunities for careers, college, and life that they may not have had without that. Modern educational resources help students prepare for a complex technology-rich world. So it's important to note that when we look at why technology is used in a particular educational setting, it's not just about the technology, it's about how it's used and how it supports that learning. And then educators, of course, and this is, of course, has come right to the fore since March, is educators rely on modern technologies to empower effective instruction. That is, of course, that's not going to change. We're all talking about sort of a new normal after we are able to deal effectively with the pandemic and the changes that's created. But we now have, every student and every teacher in our district engaging with each other through technology. And that's going to continue to create an impetus for educators to rely on these technologies, in the kinds of contexts that the technology is valuable for. So if we could move to the next slide. So there's a number of challenges and opportunities that we have as a district. This is maybe not a complete list, but I think it's a pretty solid list to talk about, or to at least sort of plant the seeds of, here are the things that need to be addressed in a really systemic and thoughtful technology plan. Challenges include, as I previously mentioned, making sure that we have equitable access to devices and connectivity. We have a lot of technology in our district, as you all know. When you visit schools, when you see students using technologies, we've got a lot of technology. It's not, to be completely blunt, it's not always equitably distributed through our district. And addressing that is an important thing for all of our students and teachers and families. Supporting distance learning, of course, is very topical right now, but that obviously has been in place prior to our full distance learning model, and it will continue to be in place after in one way or another. We need to make sure that professional learning is there so that all of our staff and teachers have the ability to meet the needs that they have in learning how to use technology effectively. Ensuring student safety and privacy is very critical. We need to make sure that all of our use of technology all of our students' use of technology is really as safe and private, so that information is kept where it should be, used for its appropriate purposes and not for other purposes. And that takes a lot of effort to do that. Making sure that we have a strong cybersecurity posture, making sure that our district network is secure from external forces that we wouldn't want in our network. We need to make sure that we have adequate enterprise level technology support. That means we have a district of around 29,000 students, well over 2,000 teachers, and many more staff. And we are, by any definition, an enterprise level IT operation. And I think that's important that we conceive of ourselves that way, to make sure that we can provide the services necessary for all of our users, all of the users of technology in our district, in an equitable and responsive way. And then finally, sustainability, which I've already addressed. A couple of opportunities that we have, and I'll be brief. But supporting digital learning tools that support meaningful instruction. So really making sure that, as we've been doing, especially since March, but long before that, of course, making sure that the tools that we use are really meaningfully selected to support instruction, and that we continue to select those tools in ways that are really valuable for students, effective in promoting good learning, and are safe. Another opportunity is to modernize some of our business systems. Business Plus is a great example. We need to be fully utilizing the scope of Business Plus. There are modules within there that we are not necessarily using to their full capacity. So examining these processes is absolutely critical to make sure that we're using the tools we have effectively, so that we can really focus on our core business of educating kids. Coordinating our technology purchasing is another. We, as many districts do, we have a rather decentralized method of purchasing technology, which is a challenge in the sense that it creates some inequities in our district in terms of the availability of technology from site to site. So trying to coordinate that purchasing better so we can take advantage of any discounts available with bulk purchasing, making sure that we're distributing and supporting that technology as effectively as possible. And then there's another one that may be out on the horizon a little bit, but really thinking about one-to-one technology programs is another opportunity. We have a lot of schools that have enough devices for every student and staff member. But do we really think of them as ways, as one-to-one programs where every student has a device 24/7 for their own use? And so thinking about those, as we know many other districts have done successfully, thinking about how to leverage that technology to make sure that we're providing education for our students that is really timely and effective, and maybe goes beyond the classroom. All right, if we could advance one more slide. So this is really a call to action around a long-range strategic technology plan. We need to have a really focused, really thoughtful approach to how we're going to move towards having a full plan in place that will really guide us into the future. And when I say long range, a lot of plans in the past have been 3 to 5 years. I think we need to go, I think we need to think a little bigger than that. I think really a 10-year plan is appropriate for us. But the key pieces here, it's got to be focused on learning and teaching. It's got to start with, why are we doing this for our kids? What is it we're doing? And as I said, we've got many of those pieces in place. You just heard about our learning continuity plan process, and that's focused on how are we supporting kids' learning. And that's the focus of a technology plan, any good technology plan for us as well. Core business services, of course, are a piece of that, but in the scheme of things, ultimately they support teaching and learning as well. So this is really where we need to go, I think, as a district. So in closing, really the second last slide here I have, if we could advance one more. And I'll dive in just a little bit here because I think it's really important that we consider how to make sure that these components of a technology plan are in place in a really considered and thoughtful plan. Firstly, of course, learning and teaching. We need to consider all of these different options. That's kind of in our face right at the moment around distance and hybrid and face-to-face models, but I do think those will continue in one way or another, and we need to be ready for those. We need to think about modern learning styles, modern learning techniques, modern pedagogies around especially digital literacy, making sure that students have the ability to learn digitally, to produce content digitally, to think digitally, and then good digital citizenship habits as well. So we need to be thinking about how we're going to support students in making mistakes, in learning what it is to be a good digital citizen, learning how to behave appropriately online. Second bullet point, equitable available technology. We need to make sure that our technology is not only equitably distributed, but we need to make sure it's available. It needs to be available when needed. It needs to be something that we're not having to think about, is this going to work or is this not, to any greater extent than necessary. And so one of the things that is absolutely critical, I believe, is making sure that, of course, a robust network architecture exists. And to do that really requires a full assessment of our network, to really look at every building, every, I won't say every cable as such, but really, to the point of every cable, every wireless access point. We need to really, dive into our data center and really do a full network assessment so that we can really identify how we're going to move forward with this and what are the priorities there. We need to make sure that we have sustainability. If we're going to build a robust network and maintain a robust network, sustainability of that, but also of the user-facing devices, for instance, is sustainable. So we need to establish appropriate refresh cycles. We need to be thinking about not only what does it cost to purchase this equipment, but what does it cost to support this equipment going forward, and when are we going to replace it? Are we going to replace it in 3 years, 5 years? Those are decisions that need to be made so that we can anticipate what that looks like into the future and how much we need to be able to support this into the future. And then I already mentioned the enterprise approach to technology support, but just briefly, really, if we're going to have these kinds of approaches to technology and really systematizing how we think of technology, making sure that our, the TIS department, who, by the way, is, as I said, I've been here 6 weeks, and this is a really phenomenal group of people. This is, I'm really proud to be part of this department because they are really working incredibly hard to support a whole new model of how we're doing technology to help our kids learn and our teachers teach. And so, really making sure that they have the support they need. They have the structures in place to be able to address work tickets as they come up, to make sure that they have the information they need, they have the documentation they need to be able to provide that kind of enterprise level support. Third bullet, security, safety, and privacy, always on the top of our minds, of course. Cybersecurity I've already addressed, but it is in this world where we see ransomware attacks on school districts, on other organizations on a daily basis. We need to make sure that our systems are secure as possible, and make sure that we have the right tools in place, the right monitoring in place, and that we have an approach that really elevates and makes sure that we have a really robust cybersecurity posture. And then additionally, on the safety and privacy piece, on that side of things, safe and secure digital tools. We know that not every digital tool is made the same. We have a world where we have a lot of different vendors that have a lot of different tools. Some of them are great, Some of them are not so great. Some of them are great in certain circumstances. Some of them are not. And so we need to be thinking really clearly and continuing to think about how we're going to deploy digital tools and make sure that their policies and our policies about using those tools are very safe and secure. Best practices, this is I think another really important piece is we are in TIS, we are experts in many ways. We're not all experts at everything. Nobody is. Technology is a very dynamic world. It is a place where, if you think back to a technology department of 30 years ago, we had folks that knew most everything in how a technology operation could work. That doesn't exist today. There is no expert in IT. There are experts in portions of IT. And I think it's really important that we continue to have as much input and as much help and assistance with providing us with ideas and places to bounce ideas off, and making sure that we've got really a good lens on the best practices that exist nationally, locally, regionally. And I think Digital Advisors has been providing that for us. This is not a forever kind of thing. Our work with Digital Advisors, I don't think, is a forever effort. It's a let's get us to a place where we need to be kind of effort. So I'll leave that at that. And then finally, funding. When we talk about funding, we really have some opportunities there, but we need to use them responsibly. So responsible use, of course, of Measure J. We have access to E-rate funding through the FCC, the federal program that provides us with reimbursements for a lot of our infrastructure and internet connectivity expenditures that we will obviously continue, and that provides us with a ton of ability to do things we otherwise wouldn't be able to do. So really working those into our approach. And with that, I will, if we could move to the last slide, I will ask if anybody else, Dr. Gonzalez, Dr. Clark, have anything to add before taking questions.
Yeah, no, thank you, Robert. That was a great deal of information shared with the board at this time. And so now, just as staff, we just want to just listen and let the board have a discussion about this, about what they've heard. We'll take copious notes and we'll go from there. But at least we have a framework of really what we're facing in technology and what we'd like to accomplish over the upcoming months and years. So with that, I'll turn it back over to President Lawrence.
Yep, thank you. Board comments and questions.
Okay, thank you. It's good to meet you, Mr. Sidford, and I appreciate the work that you've put into this and the structure of the plan that you've laid out. I think where we're coming from is a feeling that this is a long time coming. We've had an expired plan for some time, and the urgency is real. And so we really need to get into specifics, I think, and action, responsibly, of course, with the right decisions. But I think action is one of the key pieces. To the point of the first half or 3/4 of your presentation are things that, I think we've been aware of for quite some time. I have a daughter who's in 7th grade, and when she started kindergarten, her principal here in MDUSD was talking about those things as well. So we understand the importance, we understand the need, and I think now we just have the urgency, particularly with our current distance learning. So a couple of things. One piece that I would like to see in the components of the plan development is how are we involving the community in the process? I think that there used to be a technology advisory committee. I haven't really seen that active since I joined the board in 2018. Though there was with the remote learning committees that were happening in planning for this fall, there was a technology committee. And I did appreciate the way that was constituted, because it was really great to be able to hear a discussion happen between you know, teachers and staff, but also parents and principals, and having the TIS staff there as well. There were a number of recommendations that group made that also I think have not yet been implemented. And it was really great to hear them even just talking about the help desk. What could that look like versus what it has looked like in the past? You know, we had a teacher in adult learning who had some experience and expertise talking with the TIS staff, and really a meeting of the minds about what's really possible there in terms of streamlining it and making it accessible not only for staff but also for families. So I would say if you haven't seen the notes from that group, take a look and let's figure out how we can really tap into the expertise of our parents and families as well. I think a number of parents have come forward and asked to join the technology team and help out. We have people who are, you know, network experts and computer scientists and all kinds of things. So I think we have a rich community that we can really tap into in terms of expertise and also resources. So that's one piece. Secondly, I would say I appreciate you saying that responsible use of Measure J. I think that's really the first step in terms of the bigger picture technology backbone that we need to make sure is in place. So I look forward to seeing a specific proposal for Measure J, and you know, how quickly we can get that into place so that all of our school sites, you know, have the broadband access that we need. I mean, even right now, in some sites, just having all the teachers on at the same time, it can get slow and challenging. So there's definitely some urgency there. On the Measure J piece, though, we have been spending money on digital advisors so far. I would say the last presentation that they gave to our board was very, very general, all stuff that we already knew. Not really, I'm not sure what the investment was worth there. So going forward with digital advisors, if we're going to continue to spend money on those consultants, it really needs to be something that's, you know, not obvious, something that is really an expertise that we're tapping into. If they really do have, you know, connections with state level resources, then I would like to see them actually bring those to our district. You know, and if we're not going to use them, then let's not pay them. Okay. And then lastly, the section on teaching, learning and teaching. You talk about when the components you have distance, hybrid, face-to-face, modern learning. So again, that's very, very general at this stage, but I think if we can look at the specifics of our plans for teaching and learning in terms of technology, I know that there's a list of, you know, tools that our teachers or parents have been looking for. How are we making those decisions? Who's getting the input? Whether it's, you know, Zoom or Google Meet, whether it's Zern or, you know, Khan Academy, whatever, right? We need to get those decisions into place, get all the feedback, and then move forward. And then along those lines too, I think under teaching and learning would be that same data about access. You talk about the equitable access, and I love that. But we really need to make sure that all of our students are able to have access to distance learning right now. So for the students who either have not logged on at all or very rarely, if we can collect the data as to how many of those are there and what's going on, you know, do they not have internet? Do they do they have a device but they don't know how to use it? I'm hearing a lot of that there are, you know, newcomer families and things that are just having trouble figuring out how to use the device. So if we can figure out where the glitch is, then we can aim the strategy, I think, really focus it on the answer, right? If the answer is just that we need to be providing tech help to our families, maybe there are partnerships out there like the Tech Exchange that some other school districts have partnered with, where you can text in any different language and get help with your device. So, but for our district, I'm not clear where we stand right now. How many of our students have access to the internet and a device, and how many of them are logging on? So including that data in our results will be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Count. Other board members? Right. So I would.
I do have a comment.
Yes, Ms. Mayo.
So I communicated earlier with Mr. Sidford, and I appreciate the responses that you provided to me. They were most helpful. Most of you know my vintage here on the board. Although I'm not a digital native, I've been involved with computers and technology since 1985, 86. And Pleasant Hill Elementary School was one of the first to purchase Commodores for computer instruction. And we sewed covers and did instruction and printed manuals, and the kids learned coding at that particular time. Of course, it's advanced, and Apple took off providing a computer for every school office. So then that was the first journey, perhaps, for individual school sites to step into computers. There's the story in West Contra where computers set for years in the warehouse and weren't delivered to school sites and used. Fortunately, Mount Diablo has been advancing. I'm grateful in one way to the pandemic. If for nothing else, it has forced every individual in the district who wants to be involved in education to move into the digital world. And this has advanced our instruction, I believe, greatly. There are cautions. I remember last spring when Mrs. Aguirre made a presentation about the overwhelming digital contact, and for some students it's not appropriate. So we need to find the appropriate approaches for each individual student. And perhaps, we need to be mindful of those students who are taking home their Chrome devices. Do they have younger siblings that could be negatively affected by the exposure to the digital screens? Because it does change the brain development if you believe in that particular science. I'm excited to see this progress. I think what's important for us to remember is we have been aware of many of the needs over these years, but there's always been a pandemic that has happened that has set us back, whether it was a need for health benefits, or it was a need for employee salaries, or it was a need for construction. But now, yes, based on this pandemic, we are going to need to focus on how we next spend our Measure J funds and how we convince our community how critical this is. I look forward to working with everyone. I know that you'll each take some time to educate me better so that I am a better digital user, but I'll keep up with you, and we'll understand more and more how our students are engaging in this world. I strongly support the digital citizenship, and whether that's delivered in the classroom or by the librarians or by parent volunteers, that is going to be essential in our work with our students and our staff as we move forward in this particular journey. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Mayo. Ms. Durkee or Ms. Mason?
So I don't really have any additional comments. I just want to say thank you for the presentation. I did appreciate the inclusion of the graduate profile that was developed in 2014. It was just your presentation. I appreciate that context and yes, we have all kind of been down, in that world for some time, but, very limited in what we've been able to do. So it's great to see that recognized. So thank you.
So, Mr. Sidford, I'd say thank you for the presentation. I think that many of the points are well taken. I will say from the private sector standpoint, from a hiring perspective, digital facility is one of the first things that we look for in in hiring people and having people who have the skills. And there are quite a few who don't. And so that's one of the things I think we need to continue to look at as we strive to, help our students graduate being college ready or career ready. And that, for many of them who can transition into jobs upon graduation, that, need the ability to navigate today's digital world. I'm reminded that when I came to the board 8 years ago, that at that time we were not broadcasting our board meetings. Not every teacher had an email address. That was a controversial issue, and we've come a long way in many respects. But every month when I opened the envelope containing the direct deposit summary of the board stipend, I'm reminded that there is still a ways to go. I think that, having a student-centric approach to this and parent-centric approach, I think Ms. Mayo's point about, when we try to find the silver lining in this pandemic and its acceleration of a digital transformation, and, teachers getting a crash course in Zoom and Google Classroom and things like that. But at the same time, recognizing, how do we continue to find ways to become a more customer-centric organization in terms of, when we ask parents to still come into an office to turn in address verifications, what can we do electronically? How can we help them? And then keeping in mind, I think, Mr. Sidford, you touched on this, and I heard other trustees mention this, that making sure that as we lay out our technology plan, that it is most influenced and most developed by the people who are closest to the classroom, that instead of a top-down directive of here is what it looks like, instead, because technology is not a replacement, it needs to be a complement to the teaching that is occurring. And so it is a tool to facilitate teaching, but not a replacement for teaching. And so that we have a clear understanding of what our teachers need, what our students need, what is working, what is not, and being very close to that, as well as, I certainly agree with the concept that our Measure J funds should be very targeted towards long-lasting infrastructure that provides access, and not short-term needs that will outlast that won't come close to matching the time frame of the bond. So, for us to purchase technology that in 2 or 3 years will be outdated using bond money is not a wise expenditure, but instead continuing to look at the infrastructure. And I think we do see that there are gaps. And, I've said that if the state of California can find $100 billion to build high-speed rail to Bakersfield, we should also be investing in infrastructure. And, even when you go from Walnut Creek or Pleasant Hill or Concord BART station into San Francisco, and being able to actually access the internet in a reasonable way, and things like that. But I think we're seeing that we need to make sure every student has access and the understanding of the technology that they need to be successful as we move forward. So I appreciate the presentation. And I also, I'm delighted to see us building expertise in-house so that we are not relying on outside consultants, and instead continuing to build that in-house. So I appreciate that as well. And thank you to Dr. Gonzalez for helping us identify folks who can get us in that direction and make that transition away from outside consultants.
Those are some great points. I just wanted to echo that, what you just said about the expertise that we have in-house, and the need for the actual users to be the ones to be designing what we're using. I don't know if you know, Mr. Sidford, that we in Mount Diablo have hosted the STEM Symposium for the region for a number of years, and our teachers are the ones who are presenting and leading that. And teachers come from other districts to come to that event. So you'll want to make sure to reach out and meet you know, some of the experts that are out there. You know, Shauna Hawes is one of our award-winning teachers who runs that, and there are many others as well. And so, so tapping into that expertise before deciding to go and, you know, hire an outside consultant for something that we have the expertise for in-house, I think is really key. And to Trustee Mayo's point, I think that, you know, we really are at a transformational stage right now. Up until March, there was a digital divide, but all school districts could assume that, well, as long as we have technology on site and in our local libraries and in our community, that, you know, students didn't need to have access at home, right? They could come to school early, stay late, go to the library, access technology when needed. But it wasn't something that was necessary. It was just kind of a luxury at home, you know, like HBO or something. And I think all of us need to make that mind shift, and that's what creates the urgency, you know, around us in this environment. Is that really, if we can figure out the data for our school district about, you know, how many of our students have access or don't, and what our needs are, and be able to then express that to the state, then together we can really advocate for, you know, broadband access for all, for example, right, which is needed not just for education, but also for employment and so many other essentials in the world today. So appreciate all the work that you're doing and looking forward to seeing how the plan comes together.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Cound.
I just want to
Yes, Dr. Clark.
Okay, I just wanted to jump in just real quick before we moved on, but you know, just two important things is that, you know, of course, you know, the only reason why we're doing this is to support learning in the classroom. So the reason why we have technology, the reason why we have the structure and whatnot is to support learning. What we want to shift towards is when teachers and when staff, you know, who are directly working with kids have ideas or have needs, we want the conversation to go from staff saying, this is what we are trying to do. And then Robert and his team can say, okay, this is how we can then support you and make that happen, instead of, no, we can't do that because our system, or no, because this is what we have. So really the whole detail in it all is really creating that collaboration. And then I just wanted to touch on, I'm going to ask Dr. Gonzalez to kind of expand on this a little more, but I think that we're not quite fully understanding the role of digital advisors, you know, as one of our consultants. They are not, you know, they are not here to help us with these real, you know, how many devices should we get, and should we go with iPad or Chromebook, things like that. I mean, they're really helping us from a, you know, from a higher level. Like, for example, and I know you've heard of the, you know, how they helped us uncover, you know, the millions of dollars we were missing out on E-Rate and things to that nature. And so they're much more of a high level think partner, but I think Dr. Gonzalez can probably explain it a lot better than I can. But I really would like, you know, just for her just briefly to touch on it, so that we don't have this misconception of what they're here for and what they're not here for. So Dr. Gonzalez?
I think your summary right there was a really good one. They're not only a thought partner, but really they have connections across every single realm of technology. And they're really helping us build that foundation, especially with the Measure J funds. I can't tell you how many times in the spring, once they arrived and started helping us, that they were reviewing every proposal coming my direction. And what they were helping me understand was, you know, it can't be knee-jerk. You've got to have step 1 and step 2 and step 3. And, you know, you're getting proposals for Band-Aids, and you really need to address the entire system. And so it's not the most effective way to try to look at and spend your funds. And I just want to point out some real key numbers to the board, that first of all, they helped us work with our assessment system to not only get out of the contract, but they helped us negotiate a $50,000 credit back to the district that has pretty much paid for the bulk of their first year of work. They worked with us on a school messenger discount and are now helping us vet some other companies that we can look at, but that was valued at an $18,000 discount that they were able to get for us. with regard to our transition to G Suite, because they had done that before in other districts. They were able to help us negotiate $27,000 off of that contract. We saved another $9,000 in just the approach to SysCloud that we needed. They were able to uncover $2.7 million worth of funding that we didn't properly address in E-rate, and a very short window for another E-rate broadband increased bandwidth just opened up. It's only going to be available for 1 month. We are currently without an E-rate consultant, and they found a very infrequently used but very legal approach to going back and taking a look at old RFPs that have been submitted in other areas and using those to piggyback, if you will, into a way to get that funding request in right away that would enable us to tap into another $1 million worth of bandwidth for our schools that we wouldn't have had. And regardless of the expertise that individuals like Robert and the folks on his team, or even myself or Dr. Clark would have, these are high-level relationships and strategy that, you know, it would probably take us 7, 8, 9, 10 years to be able to develop, and we're able to tap into that practically 24/7. So I wanted to make sure that everybody understood that digital advisors relationship, and I'd be happy to put that in the organizational update as well.
I think that's really useful. And I would just say, I think the presentation we received from them really didn't touch on any of that, and that would have been very useful. So I think that your updates on that are very well taken, and it certainly seems to be a better use of funds to have them helping, and certainly helping pay for themselves in that, versus the presentation, which was pretty generic and didn't really touch on those types of things. So I greatly appreciate that clarification. So, okay, do we have anything else on this item? Otherwise, we'll move along.
No, that. Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to move along to facilities, and Dr. Clark, over to you.
Yep, and I'm gonna just quickly turn this over to the team, so so we can discuss this again. I know the board took action a couple months ago at reducing some of the rates for some of our facilities for childcare. I know we have issues with some of our field use, and we just want to have a conversation about what's going on with our facilities and our need to continue to revisit this. And clearly we don't want to get too far without the board, so that's why we're having this. So Lisa, I'm gonna turn it over to you, and then you can turn it over to whoever's gonna, if Melanie's gonna lead this or someone else. So go for it.
I'd like to introduce our Assistant Director of Maintenance and Operations, Melanie Kozlow. She can go ahead and introduce Janet and make sure that she gets the title right, because I never want to misspeak on the title. But, you know, we really want to make sure that the key individuals who are doing the work are here and sharing with the board. So it was really important that we have other staff join us tonight. And then I believe our Associate General Counsel, Cesar Alvarado, will be opening up part of this as well. So team, take it away.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Before we let Cesar handle our first slide, I do want to introduce Janet Richardson. She is our administrative secretary here in Maintenance and Operations. She definitely is the glue that holds us together on most days, as well as with the recently departed counterpart of hers through retirement. She has taken on the day-to-day activity of our civic permit system, as well as all the behind the scenes that she takes care of with facility use. So Janet, I just wanted to introduce you to the board. Cesar, if you're there, I think we can go to the first slide.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. And we had a discussion brief before on this issue, and I think that the main point to bring here before the board is that the issue of facilities use fees and what those fees are, they are dictated by statute. And so the basic point is that under the Civic Center Act, facilities need to be made available to a number of entities, and the fees that are charged are dictated by statute. But basically, what it means is that the district has to be able to calculate what it calls its direct costs. That is, it needs to calculate the costs that are of operating, maintaining all of our school facilities. That includes repair, restoration, and refurbishment of school facilities and grounds, so that it can then have a set amount that it will charge to all of the entities using our facilities, depending on whether those entities are either members of the public or they are serving an educational interest, they are nonprofits serving an educational interest, or they are school facility, they are actually school related entities that are within the educational program of Mount Diablo Unified School District. So we do have a board policy that directly addresses this issue as to what the amounts are going to be charged. Just would refer you to board policy 1330, which currently sets forth how those charges are being implemented. But I think one of the key issues for now is trying to actually recalculate what those costs are for us going forward. And go ahead, Melanie.
Great, thank you, Cesar. And one of the things that we did upload to the docket, besides just the information on the slide, is the full verbiage for the Civic Center Act for your reading pleasure. So we'll go ahead and turn it over to Janet now.
Hi, so I've actually been working with use permits behind the scenes since 2014, and it's kind of something that's near and dear to my heart. So we currently have 23 active child care leases, and 22 of them are at elementary sites, and we have one at a middle school. Of those lease agreements we hold, we have 21 are actually land leases that vary in size from 1,920 square feet to 4,980 square feet. Every single one of those leases have a rental amount of $1 per year. There are 2 lease agreements where the sites occupy classrooms at the sites, and they average, they're $128 a year. One of the sites for a classroom, and another use is 2 classrooms, and they pay $300 a month. That includes all of the utilities. We've also uploaded an example of one of the lease agreements for you to look at. Next slide. So currently, we bill out every month for trash services, sewer, and water. All of our sites pay their own PG&E except for a couple. We have one site that pays all of their own utilities, so we don't bill them for anything. We have 2 sites that pay for trash only, and one site actually has a lease that states they do not pay for any utilities. We analyzed all of our utilities this year and enacted a new rate effective October of 2020. Based on that formula, the average amount that is paid for utilities is $145 a month.
Okay, thank you. Next slide. One of the things we wanted to touch base on and just kind of acknowledge is how our child care providers were affected because of the pandemic and the subsequent school closures. So what we understand is that most of the child care providers on our campuses went from a 2 to 4 hour business on average to an 8 to 10 hour a day business. Before COVID, the majority of our child care providers typically provided care in their own building on our campus. There were some exceptions with some after school, maybe math club or homework club or something like that, where a provider would rent for a portion of the afternoon, a classroom or 2 in order to hold those programs. Now, due to local and state level authorities and licensing, some providers required additional space on campus in order to meet the families that they serve. Child care centers are required to submit a facility use permit for space they need outside of their own building, and they are required to pay for the for the rental and custodial if applicable. One of the questions that we've been hearing, or concerns that we've been hearing, is that we raised rates during the pandemic. And so one of the clarifications that I just wanted to make was this is not accurate information. The cost for the space stayed the same per hour. So our prior charge, which was last updated in 2015, is the same rate that we have today. I think that what the shock was is renting a space for a couple hours per day versus renting the space for 8 to 10 hours, which brings us to what Dr. Clark had mentioned, that back in August, we did come to the board with a recommendation for a temporary rent reduced rate, which reduced our rates by 50%. And due to continued concern and need for our support, we did reduce that rate by an additional 25% of the rented, of the posted rate, in order to support our childcare providers, or the childcare providers on our sites. Next slide. So one of the things that we also wanted to do is, it's kind of too much to tackle all at once. So we wanted to advise you what we would be bringing forward at future meetings for future board action. So one of the things that we need to be working on is some of our verbal agreements. So there are history, years and years worth of history of facility uses, some documented, some sports organization help us with care of our facilities in exchange for use of the facilities. And these are things that we're going through, and we're trying to correct these agreements, make sure that they are memorialized, and that we work with our general counsel in order to do that. I did state in the last slide that our current fee schedule, and that would be mainly for our facility use through the civic permit system, was last updated in 2015. So we are going to be bringing some data that we've been analyzing, and bring forward some information of a future rate increase to bring everything up to what it should be. Just as an example, a sports user, like a soccer club or something like that, they have the ability to rent a field. So let's say we've got an elementary school that has 3 soccer fields on campus. Once you hit $550 of a rental per season, and excuse our error, that is actually a 3-month season, not a 5-month season, you get maxed out at $550. So a soccer club could rent 1, 2, 3 fields on a campus for $550 each, and essentially have exclusive use of that field for 7 days a week. So one of the things we want to do is look at how we do that, to be able to allow more of the public to be able to utilize and also get the fair rate. Our fields definitely need some rest time and that type of thing. So we're bringing that forward. And also to analyze and adjust, our costs and what our charges are. Janet, you want to touch base on the board policies?
Right, and just to review, the currently our fee schedule is again from 2015, and includes the direct costs, and we'd like to make sure that we include the operational costs as well. So we would like to recommend that there be language added to board policy to include future pandemics, hopefully there aren't any, or natural disasters regarding the use of our district facilities, That was a recommendation put forth at a CASBO conference, and they felt it was important. And then another thing we'd like to recommend is having in the policy, board policy, language about bringing the fee schedule back to the board every 2 years and have it reviewed just to make sure that we're remaining current and up to date on that schedule.
And with that, that comes to the conclusion of our presentation. So were there any questions?
I just want to, oh, go ahead, Joanne.
Oh, go ahead. You can go. I
was just going to say, I was just going to comment that I think it's long overdue. And I think we should be consistent with what we charge people across the board. I think we should be charging more, particularly for the child cares. I'll leave it up to you guys to figure out what's fair, but $1 a year is ridiculous to me. So I'm glad. I'm looking forward to your recommendations. I figure you guys know more about it than we know, and Cesar knows what's in the law, what we can charge, and look forward to your next presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just had I don't know if I zoned out or got confused, but on slide 5 where you have how did COVID affect childcare? And so on 8, 10, 20, we reduced the posted rates by 50%, and then it says rate further reduced another 25%. So how did that last thing happen? The additional 25%. It's just am I reading that right? So the board approved on August 10th to reduce to 50% of posted rates. So we did 50 and then an additional 25. Is that how you read that?
Yeah. So so there were some child cares that had reached out who were struggling, and so we worked individually with those particular child cares on on trying to help them continue to be able to serve our families. But again, that was something that was done on an individual basis. That again, we had to make this adjustment just because we're in the middle of this pandemic. But we would like to move away from those sorts of practices, and that came through the superintendent's office.
Okay.
And just one minor comment, when we initially were speaking with all of our child care providers, we had some Zoom meetings where many of us met with them in a open communicative session. Many of them thought that they were going to need space that they ended up not needing. And so while we had maybe 5, 6, 7 different different providers reaching out, thinking they were going to, or believing that they were going to have more of our students, in the end, I think it was 1 or maybe 2 childcare providers that actually are renting space, and the others are either in their own building only, which is great, or are not even open yet because they don't have the need. So we have some centers like Diana Dare that has, facilities on multiple of our sites. They've sort of combined kids at a few sites and they're not open everywhere. That's the same with our YMCA childcare provider. And so I think the thought was that they were going to need it and ended up not needing it.
Okay, so just again, going on a previous slide, you say it's 23 lease agreements and 21 of them are just land leases, and that's what's $1 a year. If they have their own building, they're just paying $1 a year for the land. If they're using our space, then they charge these fees that we're talking about, which we just reduced 50%, and then in some cases another 25%. Correct. Okay, I got it. Thank you.
Other questions or discussion?
I appreciate the review. I think it's always important to review our agreements that we have with the centers and for the use of our athletic fields as well. Some of the comments that I received, and I guess I'm the only one that received them, was it seems like Mount Diablo is trying to remove all child care facilities off of our campuses. I'm hoping that's not the case. Another comment that got back to me was that the district thinks that we make fistfuls of money while we operate these child cares, and they disagree with that. Some of the child cares are actually operated by a volunteer board of directors, so the only employees they have are the site manager and the staff working at those sites. So there's no, you know, presumably there's not an individual making a lot of money. So contrary to Ms. Mason, I'm a little bit concerned that that our consideration be just and fair when we're looking at the situations. I noticed that the slide that Mr. Alvarez spoke to used the words allows school districts, and another one, the other one that was in the PDF says that a school district, it doesn't necessarily say that we must charge a certain amount or a minimum amount. So I guess I need to do a little bit more study regarding the ed codes and the regulations to understand what we are required to do. Or is it something that it gives us the authority to do this within certain parameters? I do believe that childcare is important for our families across the district. I'm totally grateful for the CARES after school program, but that services certain communities that necessarily aren't available in the remainder of our communities. Yes, they may be higher wealth communities, but there are still struggling families in those communities, and the daycare providers probably can provide the best service for the best value on our school campuses. So I hope that we are not interested in eliminating the childcare. Another piece that went along with that was the statement that we needed to secure our campuses so that you know, there were fences everywhere and we didn't have walk-on people, and that the daycares were located at the back of our campuses, and that implied that there was perhaps inappropriate access to the campuses by individuals. I believe that our parents, for the most part, are trustworthy, and that we should not be excluding them or their children from our campuses. And, you know, we need to look at all of these issues when we're looking at the policies that we are seeking to establish. Regarding the fields, I have argued unsuccessfully with administration that we needed to look at the field use for many years, and I do agree with Mrs. Richardson's comment and Melanie's comment that the fields do need rest periods between the use on the campus, especially after rainy days where it's grass turf, and we frequently see this, those fields used daily. So I welcome the further review of this and look forward to the policies as they come forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's see. I think I think about childcare from the perspective of what is the need in the community right now, and how can we be a good partner with all the childcare providers in the area to make sure that we're meeting the need. So when we refer people to what's called COCO Kids, to the childcare resource and referral, you know, if they hear back, there are no childcare availability in my area, and I'm an essential worker, you know, trying to go work in a hospital, but I have, you know, young kids that need childcare, and the one that normally exists on the school campus is closed, that's the kind of scenario that really concerns me, right? If we've closed the one on our campus and that has been the source of childcare, and as to Trustee Mayo's point, affordable childcare in the area, then are we contributing to the lack of childcare in that scenario, right? So looking at what some other school districts have done, I know in some cases they've actually provided the the extra classroom space for free in return for teachers getting priority for the childcare at that site. That's one example. You know, and then also is there priority for essential workers throughout the area? So I don't know what the possibilities are in our district, because it looks like we've not had a system in place before to provide teacher childcare. I think in the district where they did that, they already had a system where teachers had some sort of priority for childcare at their site. Whereas I think a number of our sites were already full with families at the site, and teachers weren't necessarily seeking childcare at the site where they teach. So given the disparities as well, that we have different agreements in different places, I agree that we should try to be, you know, as fair and across the board in terms of our fees. It does seem odd that we have one site, for example, that you mentioned that doesn't pay any utilities. Not sure the reasoning behind that, if that was due to a particular need, or if that's the site where the volunteer run daycare is located. I'm not sure. But I guess I would just say, how can, you know, what is, for example, our teacher need for childcare? I think we did a survey of our teachers in Mount Diablo to find out who needs daycare, which would be really helpful for them to be able to focus and teach. Is that need still there, and to what degree? And is that something that we can help with through our system? Or you know, are all of our daycares full because they can serve many fewer children within the space they have, and we're not providing them the room to expand, right? So could we find out what is the need in terms of our teachers and staff and our community, and then how can we be a good partner in that?
And I'll certainly, Dr. Clark, in a moment defer to you, but I would just share, you know, this is something that Ms. Mason and I helped facilitate over the summer prior to Dr. Clark's joining us. And, you know, there are several different pieces here, and I'll try to address them. Was one, I think, and this is something Ms. Mason's brought up for quite some time, is that we have not had consistency and been clear on a policy. And so I think that was one of the things we were striving for. Two, you know, I will just say that we had a number of different childcare facilities reach out, some of them existing and things like that. In every single one of those, we tried to find a way to partner with them. We do need to balance the fact that when someone is using, if they are using our facilities, there are costs incurred on our part in terms of cleaning and maintenance and things like that. And we did look at, you know, reduced fee structures and things like that, because, you know, as Ms. Mayo pointed out, there are certainly many of these that are, you know, parent-led volunteer organizations, nonprofits. And so we wanted to balance that. And so we tried to be consistent and accommodating. And I have not heard anything other than positive feedback from the people who we dealt with, that, you know, they would express concerns. They worked with Melanie, they worked with Dr. Clark, they worked with other members of staff, and we were just very good partners. And I'm not aware of anyone coming back after Ms. Mason and I, you know, helped get them pointed in the right direction, of anyone who was not satisfied with, you know, how we helped solve. Because at the end of the day, the number one priority was we want to provide a safe environment for as many of our students as we can, and as we need to. And so that's kind of resoundingly the feedback I've received. Dr. Clark, I would turn it over to you beyond that.
Yeah, I would just say that, you know, we have, you know, I have to, you know, really acknowledge staff, that staff has been willing to bend over backwards in order to support these facilities. So, you know, I know that, you know, what Trustee Mayo shared, that's some sentiment that's out there, that there is this narrative, although maybe just held by a few, that we are some way looking to capitalize on this pandemic, and that we are standing in the way of you know, of these facilities, you know, meeting the needs of their families. And speaking for the district, that couldn't be further away from the truth. But in doing that, what we have found is that it is very difficult to manage, you know, all of these different facilities with different agreements and different price scales and things to that nature when we have very limited staff and you know, and we're facing many challenges. So that's part of the reason why we're just sort of bringing this forward and just seeing there is a need for some consistency. There is a need to you know, to really look at our practices and to look at our facilities and to look at our partnerships and you know, and to go forward. But then, you know, I think the employee daycare is something that's a little you know, that's just a little difficult to look at right now because we're not requiring our teachers to be on campus. And one of the reasons why our teachers ask not to be required to be on campus is because they have childcare. So in many districts, when there is teacher childcare, it's done in sort of a co-op framework because, you know, if you're just talking about putting teacher kids in with regular kids, sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes teachers do their own childcare and it's through a co-op system. So we haven't even begun to, you know, to really explore that. And so I just think that this really just shows the complexity of this. And, you know, I definitely want to tip my cap to Janet and to Melanie because they're the ones on the front lines, you know, trying to accommodate folks, but trying to do it within the policies and within the rules of the district. And that's difficult. And so we want to be able to, you know, make that as clear as possible so that our folks can, you know, can really work their magic with the community and make this a win-win situation. So, so again, we don't have the answer today, but again, going forward, we're going to look at bringing multiple proposals back and definitely looking for input from any and all on how we can continue to, you know, to improve our service in this area.
And then I guess my last, please, Dr. Clark.
I was just going to say that I just wanted to be crystal clear that the district and the board, you know, I'll speak for the board and superintendent that we have not looked to capitalize on a pandemic and make money off of this situation. It's the furthest from it. We're actually losing money in many instances, and so that's the concern. And I just want to be 100% clear that we're actually doing 100% the opposite of what that small narrative is that's out there. So sorry, I'll defer to you, President Lawrence.
No, thank you. I think that was great additional information. And so on a slightly different, you were asking for feedback. So one question I have is just with our facilities, I know that you and staff have started to open some of our facilities, but I know others where fields are still closed, and I'm not sure if like all the basketball hoops are back up. And, you know, I think there's this balance between, you know, wanting to not encourage huge groups of people and to protect our facilities. And we also want to make sure, I certainly understand keeping campus and, you know, adjacent fields closed during school when we do have teachers on campus providing instruction and when we have daycare. But I know, you know, as I mentioned earlier, I don't know that we're, you know, it doesn't yet seem like there's a foreseeable end to a lot of these shelter in place. You know, I think that some aspects of it, we need to be prepared that it's going to continue. And so, you know, I think families and our students are looking for, you know, exercise and recreation and having accessibility to the fields and things like that. So I'm wondering kind of where we are district wide, if you would mind sharing that.
Yeah, so I'll touch on it, and then Melanie, if I leave out some major details or something, you can bail me out. But you know, so I made the decision, you know, I don't know, a month ago, 6 weeks ago or so, where we still, you know, we're in this shelter in place. We're in the purple. We're in the most restrictive area, and it's, how does it look when you drive around town and you see a you know, a softball team out, you know, having a game on one of our facilities, or soccer practice, or things like those, or people calling the office wanting to rent space either in a field or a facility. And so, you know, I made the decision in consultation with Dr. Gonzalez and Melanie that we would just close everything down during this period. And I believe we did make a couple of exceptions. I believe we have a faith-based group that's meeting outdoors at one of our facilities. So we didn't want to stop that. But we just said any new applications or whatnot, we're not going to accept at this time. And now, we're receiving word that the county might be shifting into another level in terms of active COVID cases in Contra Costa County. And so then we're going to revisit that at that point. Does it make sense now to reopen up some of our facilities as the county starts to reopen? So that's kind of where we are now. Melanie, did I leave anything out?
The only other thing is that we do have high school conditioning, so sports conditioning approved at all of our 5 major high schools. And we're starting to see which Samantha Allen and I will be working with our high schools like we did with our sports or athletic departments for some other groups that are looking at doing a similar social distance type school student event. And so we're just kind of working on those things. But as far as any outside user, we are not accepting new applications for use at this time. We are finding use happening all over the place. And it's one thing if it's, a family tossing a ball around, using our field as their park, or running around a track or something like that. But we're also finding that many of our spaces, as we know, are wide open and great because it does allow when it's safe for use of our facilities. But we've been hearing information about, youth sports taking place on our fields unauthorized, as well as adult sports. And so one of the things that we're doing is just going to be looking for some direction, like Dr. Clark said, as we move into this next phase. It's one thing to be safe, and it's another thing to use the facility. And we get those phone calls, why are you allowing something? We're really not. We're just trying to work within the guidelines that we have so that we can continue to open. So we'll just defer to Dr. Clark and the board as we do lessen some of those restrictions. But right now we are not approving any outside users.
And I certainly think that is a wise policy. And even, I will say I'm glad to see that we are working very thoughtfully and with our high school athletics. But I know that we've had high school athletes in our district who have tested positive for COVID. And I think we've seen, organized sports at, especially at the university level where they've had infections run rampant, and things like, the national championship LSU football team, where I think more than half their players have tested positive for COVID. And so I think that is certainly something that, lends itself to the let's go slow, let's be diligent. And we also, even though the, mortality rate of high school athletes, is presumably much, much lower than, at-risk populations and things like that. One of the things we don't know is what is the potential long-term health damage that might be done to people who do contract this disease. And I think that's something for us to be mindful of. More, I guess, I'm wondering where we are with not for organized groups, but rather, opening fields for people who want to run and for families who do want to kick or throw a ball around, and some of those more ad hoc. And I think we would certainly want to share with the community, here's what we're doing. This is not open for, seven basketball teams to suddenly all congregate and start practicing and scrimmages and things like that. But in an ad hoc fashion, are we able to start looking at that? Because I think in some ways, the fact that our facilities are limited in use is then causing people to go to other facilities and some of our own facilities that are very open, and we're pushing more people into a smaller number of spots. Now, it's certainly possible if we open up more spots, more people will come, but I would like to see us consider things like opening the tracks and things like that if we can do so safely and for individual and small informal use versus organized activities beyond what we're doing for our own high school, athletes and things like the faith-based organization that Dr. Clark mentioned.
So Trustee Lawrence, are you?
We will. Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Trustee.
Just clarifying, are you talking about like in general, if there's a field attached to a school, but the school is still fenced off, whether that gate is left unlocked or locked, like on a weekend, that sort of thing?
Right.
Like for the just community access?
Yes.
And my question was just for Dr. Clark and Melanie. I've seen teams that are not our teams at Riverview because they can come in the Riverside. Do you want me to, I'm not going to say anything to them, but do you want me to tell you guys, report it, or just know that's where we are right now?
No, if you can just shoot me an email safely from your home,
yeah, I'm not going to go there.
Then we can follow up. But yeah, I think a lot more will will come to light as the county works towards coming off of this tier that we're currently in. But it is a catch-22 because we do have limited maintenance on who can upkeep our fields, and then when we have individuals who are out there and we don't want to, we had a situation where one of our maintenance workers was basically attacked by a community member and things like that, and we don't want to put them in that situation. But by all means, we want our fields available. If a family wants to go out and kick the ball or run around and stuff like that, we want to support that, but we also don't want teams coming in from other cities and things like that who just see a field that's not being supervised or that's not chained off, because most fields are. Mm-hmm. And so again, we carry liability with that. There's a bunch to that, but in terms of what President Lawrence was asking for, we will come up with some guidance for our maintenance department, and we'll share that with the schools so that we're all on the same page.
And I think just to add, we do have some signage that we've been working on obtaining, whereas we, preparing for this next phase. So maybe, at some of our elementary schools that are wide open, of course, families can come and use the field once we open back up, but identifying that the backstop and the ball field is still closed. So we are getting ourselves prepared for that. And we'll be obviously communicating with that as we move into the next phase.
I also think that there would need to be language around playground equipment. The primary playground equipment, as well as the what is it called? The elementary playground equipment, the age grades 3 through 5, because once a family comes on to the playground, if the playground itself, the playground equipment is not fenced off, the kids will be on that, and that's one of the areas that are still restricted in all of our parks, at least in the parks that I'm seeing, because young children, you can't keep young kids from each other, and they want to play and talk and hug and do all those kinds of things. And it's also the challenge for us to continually sanitize that playground equipment versus the open fields, which I can understand where Mr. Lawrence is coming from. I just am concerned about human nature and the challenges that you're going to set up for Mrs. Richardson and Melanie in approving those permits and allowing people to be on the campuses, and that the calls are going to increase to our weekend security folks about rogue groups playing on our fields.
I think even pre-COVID that our district was not necessarily consistent across the board as to which gates are left unlocked or locked at various campuses. So it is something to consider as we move forward, you know, beyond COVID, to consider, you know, who is upkeeping the fields. In some cases, they had been locked because, you know, it was hard to maintain them and get them ready for school on a Monday if you know, the community was not, you know, really picking up all their trash and dogs and all those kinds of things. And so one other thing to consider as you move forward, I think, is the partnerships with the various cities. In some cases, I think there have been partnerships where, you know, there's collaboration in terms of upkeep of the fields and the locking and unlocking of gates at various times and things like that. So just keep that in mind.
I do just want to add one other really quick thing, because we've touched base on the tracks a few times, just to remind everyone that our high school stadiums, which do contain these synthetic tracks, are always locked on weekends unless a youth event is taking place where we have district staff on site to be able to maintain. So I think just kind of as we're thinking of moving into that next phase, we do have many elementary schools and middle schools that have, you know, a track, whether it be decomposed granite or asphalt. But just keep in mind when we're talking about those running tracks, if we're speaking of the high schools, that is something that requires an additional, you know, person on site and all of that to be able to protect those. So just wanted to put that out there, just for food for thought.
Of course, and I'm certainly not suggesting that, but rather at the ones that we have in the past had open and things like that at the elementary
and we do have many elementary schools that before didn't have a paved track that we've tried to turn from decomposed granite into asphalt over the last 2 years. So we'll actually maybe have some more of those facilities available. Like we did that at Ayers Elementary and I believe Sequoia Elementary. Just, you know, 2 projects right off the top of my head.
I appreciate the information that the tracks at the high school levels are to be locked on weekends, because there are a couple of communities that continually ask that question, and I'll be able to share with them in certainty that they're supposed to be locked and no one should be on those tracks. So thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Any other questions or comments on this topic? All right, thank you everyone, very much appreciated. So we move along to item 4.4, which is the review and potential approval to recreate 3 full-time employee teacher induction and support program coaches. Dr. Clark?
Yes, I'm going to introduce Dr. Rubio for this item, and he can introduce and explain this particular request.
Good morning, board members.
Dr. Rubio.
Hi, board members. Good afternoon. Good evening. I'm a little under the weather today. I'm sorry. This request is coming before you because we do have a somewhat urgent need to provide some support for approximately 42 or 43 new teachers to the district. We are requesting that we are able to reinstate and rehire for 3 additional FTE so we can support new teachers. And I'd like to ask Jen Sachs if she could chime in at some point in a moment. The background, I think, this you're familiar with and the need. So we're certainly happy to entertain any questions. Our primary concern is getting something in place as we work through some details with Medea regarding the contract language that requires that there is a program and that that design is negotiated with them. And I don't know, Jen, if you wanted to add anything, you can, or board members, if you have a question.
No, just that last count. We have 44 first-year teachers, and let's see. let me just do the difference, 28 second year teachers. And so it's a total of 72 first and second years.
Yeah, thanks. Any questions, board members, regarding this?
I would just say that, in a lifetime ago in early March, when we looked at this, at the time we were looking at reducing the number of teachers. We were not projecting a pandemic, which would wreak havoc on our teacher ranks. And, we had supported as a board, and I certainly did, of cutting back for this position, but always with the statement that, hey, if our needs changed and we needed to bring it back, that we would be in a position to do so. And so certainly under the circumstances, it seems worthy of consideration. And so appreciate that it's been brought back.
I think the biggest impact was the PARs, right? I don't want to create the impression that we've had a lot of teachers have tragic endings with us because of the pandemic.
No. To your point, Trustee Durkee, I think actually, yes, the PARs, but also I do think if anybody was on the fence, the pandemic was something that they just really had to kind of reflect on whether or not they were wanting to kind of
continue. Yeah. Okay.
Well,
the good news is we have 44 new teachers too. So I mean, that's like.
Yeah. No, I should have chosen my words perhaps differently, but not in the sense that I do know that many teachers, as a combination of PARs and with because they were in at-risk groups, they made the decision to go ahead and retire from the district.
Right.
And I appreciate that. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I was just going to move us on and make a motion. So.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to say I appreciate that that you're coming back to the board with this, even though there was a prior decision. I think this is a good example of really being mindful and focused on our teacher and student needs, to make sure that our new teachers are successful and have the support that they need. And this appears to be the best model to do that. So I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, let me just add very, very quickly. I want to take a moment to appreciate the leadership for the Teachers Union for collaborating with us and trying to come up with a quick solution here. We still have some things to work out regarding what temporary help these teachers can receive while we try to quickly move forward and follow the contractual process that's required to hire these 3 people if you approve tonight. So we're hopeful that both the union leadership and us together can really prioritize the need of these 40 people, because there's a little bit of a gap right now on how we see temporary help. So fingers are crossed, but I do appreciate that their willingness to collaborate on it.
Yes. Okay, Mr. President, I move to approve the recreation of 3.0 FTE teacher induction and support program coach positions.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Durkee, second by Ms. Mayo. Ms. Mayo, how do you vote?
Yes.
Ms. Durkee?
Yes.
Ms. Cound?
Yes.
Ms. Mason?
Reluctantly, yes.
I will also vote yes. Item passes 5-0. So thank you for that. At this point, Dr. Clark, do we have anything else to cover?
Oh, I think we've covered a great deal. I think, I'm going to be asking the trustees just to give us feedback. This is the first study session that we've done under my time here, and we want to make these valuable for the trustees to be able to gather information and and talk about relevant topics. So I will be looking for that feedback. So thank you very much, President Lawrence.
Absolutely. Thank you for organizing it. I think agreed. It was very productive. I think we had a chance to go in depth on several issues and cover some important things. So with that, I'm going to adjourn the meeting and do something slightly different, which is I'm going to adjourn it in memory of a woman who I think has had a profound impact on the lives of many of our our students and whose loss is one that I've heard from our community and students, and that is Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And so I will be adjourning the meeting in her honor. So thank you. Good evening, and we will see you next Monday.